Hello, good evening, happy full moon. So, we're going to read chapter 2 of The Moon Eyed People, and chapter 2 is entitled The Moon Eyed People. Hey, Genevieve, welcome in. Happy full moon. So, man, I last minute there my camera, well, we lost power and my camera didn't link back up again. Bummer. So I went with my other camera. So here we are. And I think I'm going to have to tuck this back because I got to sweating. Yeah, I mean, it started raining out there. So full moon in Capricorn. And I'm collecting rainwater on the full moon in Capricorn. Oh my gosh. Jumo. What's Jumo? Sitting outside drawing. Awesome. That's great. That's a great way to spend some full moon energy, I think. So, The Moon Eyed People, chapter 2. The Moon Eyed People. Once, long ago, in the moontime, there was a girl, and she was changing. There had been drops of blood. Her mother told her she had reached the age when she should take a husband, but she already knew who she would marry. When twilight came, she walked down to the river, where she had built a house beneath an upturned canoe. And when the moonlight shone into her home, she dreamed of making love to the moon. She watched him, glowing brightly, full and round, and her heart melted. She would be Moon Girl. Let me show you this picture. Hey, Stony Faith, welcome in. Happy full moon. Okay, so... Boop. There we go. Okay, yeah, the sweaty. Her mother told her that she was being silly and that there were plenty of nice boys in the village and she should choose one of flesh and blood. But she thought all the village boys had feet of clay and faces of acne, and not one shone as brightly as her moon. One night, moon finished from the sky, hidden behind a cloud. Oh, vanished. One night, moon vanished from the sky, hidden behind a cloud, and she worried he had left her, and whether he would ever return. As she stared into the water where Moon's reflection had been, a young man appeared, naked as the day and glowing brightly. He gazed on her long black shiny hair in plaits, her deep almond eyes, and her smile like a crescent moon. He told her to close her eyes, and he lifted her into the sky, and the wonder of the whole world opened up in front of her. She found herself on a red sandstone earth, where she saw a small wooden cottage with a red-tiled roof, smoke billowing from the chimney, and redbud growing around the ground, or around the door, and redbud growing around the door. One room downstairs, a fire blazing in the hearth, and a bedroom upstairs, reached by a rickety wooden staircase that Moon was far too busy to fix. The front yard contained every kind of flower and fern, dog rose and honeysuckle, and every fluttering, crawly thing and creeping, bitey thing, caterpillars and spiders and millipedes. The backyard was a forest of every kind of tree, cedar and rosewood, maple and dogwood, and every bird and animal, coyote and possum, raven and hummingbird. Moon told her that she could care for these creatures, feed and water them, and if they increased and grew, then he may consider taking her for his wife. Meanwhile, she was to sleep in the woods and never enter his house. Moon Girl bit her tongue. And then there's a little space here, and we're moving into a different part of the story. On the day Nanyahi was born in the Cherokee town of Ch.2, Tennessee, in 1738, a white wolf loped across the moon. Her mother was Wolf Clan, and her father from the Delaware, and they nicknamed her Sistanagiska, or wild rose, for her skin was as soft as rose petals. She played stickball with the other children, tended the shared gardens, and learned how to fire a gun, for she grew up in a wild place and unstable time. People were fighting people. Settlers were at war with settlers. Skirmishes and feuds were commonplace. Nanyehi watched her uncle, Atakulakula, yeah, Atakulakula. He allowed a group of Moravian missionaries access to his land in exchange for the building of schools. Some accused him of pandering to the Christians, while others believed he was using them to fund the Salagi education system. Her uncle walked a tightrope. He balanced people and settlers in either hand, and from him she learned the route to peace was through smoking a pipe and speaking words. She could do this. Her people's law was overseen by women, and the men listened. When she was 16, Nanyehi fell in love with a shining warrior called Sula, or Kingfisher. All the girls adored him, but she was the one his eyes fell upon. She had long black hair streaming down her back. She was clever and strong. Her words poured out like honey, and she knew he would be fearful of her menstrual blood, so she met his gaze and never once blinked. She'd married Sula, and they had two children, Kati and Hiskitihi. During the Battle of Taliwa with the Muskogee in 1755, Nanyehi was at her husband's side, chewing bullets to make them more deadly. When he was struck down, she picked up his gun and led her people to victory, then wept for Tsula. But not for long, for she was now Nanyehi, war woman, and she knew this gave her the strength to lead her people into peace. She was presented with a black slave who had belonged to a Muskogee warrior she had slain. Nanyehi was 17, and she had already lived a long life. She was honored with the title of Gigao, a title given only to the most beloved of women. As Gigao, she held a voting seat in the Council of Chiefs, with the power to imprison or free people, so she became a mediator, always pursuing peace rather than war. She was fearless and never bit her tongue. Now we're returning back to the Moon Girl. Moon Girl worked hard by day. She watered the garden and sowed seeds, tended to the animals and built them nesting boxes, and the creatures of the forest multiplied. Soon her work was done, but she hardly saw Moon. He was so busy shining his light at night. She said, "Moon, I have finished all my work. Yet you go out every night and you work hard, and I am separated from my people. Please, can I come with you? I am strong and clever. I can stand by your side." Moon replied, "Your work is here, and I have much to do, and you take too much of my time loving me. But you may enter my house. Keep the fire blazing in the hearth. Cook food for yourself. Clear the cobwebs and the spiders, and I will visit you during the day. But on no account open the drapes that cover the windows." She twisted her hair in her fingers and considered telling Moon what he could do with his drapes. She doubted her love, but she looked into the sky and watched him as he shone his light on the world. And she knew if she helped him, the creatures who lived on the red earth would flourish. She lit a fire, watered the garden, fed the bats and owls, and at the end of the night, she settled down beneath an old cedar tree and read stories from her book to Moon, while he lit the pages with his moonlight. From the sky, Moon watched her and saw how she cared for the world, tended the garden, and how hard she worked. Her hair was the very color of the red earth itself, her lips as red as the fire that blazed in the hearth, and her cheeks pinched as crimson, as the red bud that grew round the door. He climbed out of his reflection in the water, full and bright. He took her by the hand, led her up the garden path, through the creaking front door, up the rickety wooden staircase that he was far too busy to mend, and into their old iron bedstead, where the bed springs squeaked all night long. Night after night this went on, and sometimes he was thin and bent and weak, and when she took him by the hand, led him up the garden path through the creaking front door, up the rickety wooden staircase that he was too busy to mend, into their old iron bedstead, and she held him in her arms and kissed him gently until he was bright once again, and the bed springs remained silent. One evening, she told him he looked cold and pale, and that she could warm him. She took some ashes and rubbed his face with her hot hands. That night, when moon rose in the sky, he was covered in craters. Then one night, she looked up into the night sky and blinked her eyes. Was this her imagination? No. There in the sky was another moon. Hey, Code. Hey, Saturnian. Welcome in, everyone. Little Wing. Oh my gosh, Heidi. Hello. This is fascinating. Okay, now we're back to Nanyehi. Nanyehi married another man, Bryant Ward, an English trader who lived within the Cherokee Nation. She did not love him, but she took him. He called her Nancy. They had a child, Elizabeth Betsy Ward, and then he vanished. She knew he would. With her daughter by her side, she searched for him, and they found Bryant Ward in South Carolina, living with another wife and children. This family were kind to her, but this was not acceptable. This man was incapable of being faithful, and she would always be a second wife through his eyes. She had no feeling in her soul for this bigamist. He had served his usefulness. He had given her what she wished for, a voice in both worlds. She was Nancy to the settlers, Nanyehi to the people, and ma'am to the enslaved. As a woman and a warrior, she spoke of an end to war between people. In 1781, at a meeting between settlers and natives, she said, "You know that women are always looked upon as nothing, but we are your mothers. You are our sons. Our cry is all for peace. Let it continue. This peace must last forever. Let your women's sons be ours. Let our sons be yours. Let your women hear our words." She saved the life of a woman called Mrs. Bean, who in gratitude taught her how to domesticate animals and grow corn, and so Nanyehi became the first farmer amongst her people. She learned how to quilt and sew. She made clothes from cotton, and soon there was a division between the women who farmed and the men who hunted. She traded with the British and was given more black slaves to help with the agricultural work. For this, they called her civilized. Nanyehi was torn between a desire for peace and a need to protect her people's land. In 1780, she informed the untrustworthy soldier and politician John Sevier of an impending attack by the Cherokee, which resulted in him leading his troops into a brutal battle at Boyd's Creek, followed by the capture of Ch.2 and the burning of villages. Chota, Chota. She also worked with Chief Okonostoda, Chief Okonostoda, most beloved man of the Cherokee, who had chosen to fight alongside the British at the beginning of their Revolutionary War, but switched sides to support the European Americans. John Sevier wrote in a letter in 1810 that Okonostoda had been told, and then in this little excerpt, "It is handed down by our forefathers that white people who had formerly inhabited the country, while the Cherokees lived lower down in the country, now called South Carolina, and that a war existed between the two nations for many years. At length the whites proposed to the Indians that if they would exchange prisoners and cease hostilities, they would leave the country and never more return. I, Sevier, have heard my grandfather and other old people say that they were a people called Welsh, that they had crossed the great water and landed near the mouth of Alabama River and were finally driven to the heads of its waters. Many years past, I happened in company with a Frenchman who lived with the Cherokees. He informed me, quote, that he had been high up the Missouri and traded several months with the Welsh tribe, that they spoke much of the Welsh dialect, and although their customs were savage and wild, yet many of them, particularly the females, were very fair and white, and frequently told him they had sprung from a white nation of people, also stated that they had yet some small scraps of books remaining among them, but in such tattered and destructive order that nothing intelligible remained. End quote. The first known Welsh in America arrived in the 1660s, a group of Baptists led by John Miles of Swansea. They left the Plymouth Brethren to found their own settlement in Rhode Island, which they called Swansea. 20 years later, Pennsylvania was filling with Welsh Baptists and Quakers, and by the 1730s, they had made their way downriver to North Carolina, while at the same time the Welsh tract was established in South Carolina. The Cherokee were already there, with open minds to Christianity and a desire for appeasement in order to avoid wars over land. Many treaties were agreed to honor native land rights. Many treaties were agreed to honor native land rights, but all of them were ultimately broken. The British and the Europeans took the land. Missionaries took their souls. Artists and showmen took their likenesses. The army took their lives. Little wonder Nanyehi did not know who were her friends. The Cherokee were referred to as living in Pumpkin Town, a racist comment about skin color. In return, they called the Welsh moon-eyed people, not because they were small, white-skinned, and the men bearded, but because they lived underground and could see well in the dark. They were miners. They lived by the light of the moon. All right, back to Moon Girl. Moon Girl could not take her eyes from his bright new moon. Oh, from this. Let me get a sip and we'll do it again. Moon Girl could not take her eyes from this bright new moon that had appeared in the sky next to her old moon. Her heart beat like a drum, and as she stared, she heard a voice. It said, "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." She turned her face away, blushed as bright as the redbuds that grew around the door, and ran half stumbling up the gravelly path to the cottage. She closed the door behind her and barred it with her back. And there she stayed for who knows how long, breathing heavily. Moon had told her never to look behind the drapes that covered the windows, but she had to know if she had imagined this second moon. She pulled back the drapes, and there he was, new moon, shining more brightly now, and her heart was on fire. She closed the curtains and stayed indoors for the rest of the night, dusting the spiders and polishing the cobwebs, and every few moments gazing out of the window. That day, all she could think about was new moon. She couldn't concentrate on her jobs. She fed grass to the trees and watered the rabbits. And as twilight fell, she hung a possum on the washing line as if it were a pair of socks. In the evening, she looked up, and there he was, new moon, shimmering brightly now, and she heard the voice again. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. I can offer you a new world away from your old moon. Shall I come down?" This time she did not turn. She flushed as crimson as the redbuds that grew round her door. Then she heard herself say, "Yes." The sound of her voice startled her. She became aware of a light behind her, and she turned, and there, emerging from the woods, was a beautiful young man, glowing brightly and as naked as a newborn. He took her by the hand, kissed her, and led her up the gravelly garden path, through the old oak door, up the rickety wooden stairs that Moon was too busy to repair, and onto the iron bedstead, where the bed springs squeaked all night long. Then he left. And at the end of the night, Moon climbed down from the sky and said, "My dear, I have not seen you all night. Are you well?" And she hid beneath the quilt. The next night, the same thing happened. One moon by night and one moon by day, until 2 weeks passed. Then Old Moon climbed down from the sky, and he was thin and bent and weak. And he said to her, "My dear, your hair is redder than the sandstone earth, your lips redder than the fire in our hearth, your cheeks pinched redder than the rosebuds that grow round our door, your eyes sparkle brighter than the stars. What has done this to you?" And with that, she told him about New Moon and waited to hear what he would say. She had never seen him angry before. He thought quietly for a moment and said, "My dear, you have never glowed like this. Whatever this new moon is giving you is something I cannot offer. I will not deprive you of this." And with that, he kissed her gently on the forehead and began to climb back into the sky. Then he paused, turned, and added, "But if this moon harms one hair on your head, I will hunt him down and pinch out his light, as a finger and thumb would extinguish a candle." And with that, he continued to climb. From that day, New Moon cursed Old Moon, and his visits became less regular, the lovemaking less arousing, until one night Moon Girl looked up into the sky and he was gone. She gazed at her old lover Moon, who was shining brighter than ever, so brightly that he terrified her, and she knew the anger would lead to war. She was finished with these warring moons. She left the house and returned to the forest, where she painted her world with seeds and berries, and the trees and plants blossomed under her care. She tended the night animals who multiplied in the moonlight, and fed the day animals who foraged in the sunlight. But she knew the feud between these two moons would not end well for her red earth. Wow. All right. To Nanyehi. Nanyehi, Nancy Ward, spent her life trying to broker peace between warring men, but nothing could protect the Salagi women from encroachment on their land. Her people warned her against appeasement, that she would be repaid with endless broken promises. When she was too fragile to attend a peace gathering in 1817, she wrote, "Your mothers and sisters ask and beg of you not to part with any more of our land. I have great many grandchildren, which I wish them to do well on our land." When Granny Ward joined her ancestors in the spirit world in 1822, a white swan flew into the air, and her soul was released at last. The girl they nicknamed Sistunagiska, Wild Rose, passed back into the red earth. She once had a vision that showed a great line of people marching west, mothers with babies in arms, fathers with small children on their backs, grandmothers and grandfathers carrying large bundles, white soldiers with guns by their side, and a trail of the weak and sick behind them. In 1838, Nanyehi's people were forcibly evicted from their land by President Andrew Johnson Indian Removal Act, and marched along with enslaved people under armed military guard to present-day Oklahoma. 4,000 died of starvation, disease, and cold. Women cried for their children, and their tears left behind a trail of white roses, with 7 leaves for the 7 clans of the Cherokee, and golden centers to remember the greed for the land. It's choking me up. The women knew they had created this beauty in the midst of sadness, and now they had the courage to protect their children, who would found a new Cherokee nation in the West. The Cherokee rose grows all along the trail where they cried. Nuna hi du na tlo hi lui. The rose is known to botanists as Rosa levigata, a native of China, Laos, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and was introduced into America in the 1780s. It, too, had been uprooted from its homeland and planted in a strange world. The end. That was the Moon-Eyed people. Wow. Okay, oh, yeah, there's this little picture of like a wolf or something, a creature. I'll show you. That was some big energy there, man. It doesn't make sense to me when they're suffering like that, how people go along. Oh my goodness, there's so many crazy words in this one. I wasn't planning on reading chapter 3, but it's only been 25 minutes. Yeah, fear. How long is this one? It's not very long. Let's try and get through it. Oh Lord, I'm excited to know the story. I just on this first page alone, there seem to be lots of terms. Hey Trace, yes, welcome in. I'm going to read another one. So this one's called Where the Welsh Came From, chapter 3. And look at this cool picture. I don't know if I have to actually put it in all the way because it's, I don't think I can hold it up all the way for you to be able to see it. There we go. Boop, 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 boop. Where you at? 1, 2, 3 is a pretty good one. Yeah, I'm pretty focused. 1, 2, 6 is fine. Okay, where the Welsh came from. Let me introduce myself. I am Sisey, son of Dafydd Ifin. Dafydd Ifin. And I work as a gravedigger here in Langwyryfon. It's Langwyrwyfon. Langwyryfon. So that's where he digs graves. On the little mountain, Mynydd Bach, which is Mynydd. Mynydd, I think that's how you say it. I am an old, stooped back crow who takes pleasure in making beds for the dead. This cold clay is an archive of the stories of everybody who sleeps here. You can read the passage of time in the soil. Look, this piece of earth has never been dug before. Whoever is laid here will be buried in virgin ground. The church is dedicated to a village girl, Ursula, who was sent to Amorica, Brittany, by her father to marry Conan Meriadoc. She took 11,000 virgin handmaidens with her, but they were all beheaded in a battle in Cologne, every one of them. Now I have buried them all, rich and poor, old and young, magistrates and criminals, preachers and blasphemers, drunkards and teetotalers, writers and illiterates, fiddlers and harpists, artists and academics. I can tell you, there isn't a single virgin amongst them, and they all had heads. I was born in a stone cottage amidst the bogs and swamps of Mynydd Bach. You can see us clinging to the rocks by our fingernails. Or can you see us clinging to the rocks by our fingernails? My father, Dafydd, scraped a living quarrying stone to build houses and roads, and digging peat to burn in the hearth to keep his children warm in the freezing winters. My grandparents worked the land before us, and my children will work the land after me. It has always been so, and ever will be. My people have fought landowners for generations for the rights to live on the common lands. Let me tell you how we came here. The king of Persia was a ruthless man who tormented and taxed the nomadic tribes who lived around his palace, and if they complained, they were slaughtered by his soldiers. But these nomads were wild warriors. And one day, a wily old chieftain decided enough was enough. He took the eggs of 50 roes, large, flightless birds who roamed the plains, and ordered 50 men to raise them as battle chargers. The roes were strong, it's ROHS, by the way, with scales on their necks and thick feathers on their bodies. So when bridled and ridden into battle, they were indestructible. They tore the Persian army to pieces. The king, however, was not a man to be defeated. He ordered a powerful conjurer to cast a spell that turned the roes into fairies, an enchantment that was to last for 3,000 years. The roes hid beneath the forests and below the water, and soon the tribes had nothing to protect them from persecution. They returned to lives of torment and taxation until they were left with little choice but to flee Persia. The fairies went with them as they walked toward the west, living as nomads, robbing and stealing out of desperation, until they came to a peaceful place. Here they built a great walled city, and they named it Troy. One day, they looked over the city walls and saw a large wooden caravan parked outside the main gates. It was gilded with gold, with 8 broad wheels and a man's head carved on the front. For 3 days, they watched from the ramparts until inquisitiveness got the better of them. And on the 3rd day, they opened the gates and hauled the caravan into the city. They were admiring the craftwork when the door of the caravan creaked open, and 150 fierce warriors clad in golden armor leapt out. One man blew on a trumpet. More warriors rushed toward the open gates, and there was a terrible slaughter. A handful of the tribe and a few fairies escaped the massacre, and they fled further west, into the Crimea, where the Russians chased them south towards Spain, then north into France, where they reached the coast and settled once again. They called themselves Breton and named their land La Bretagne. Bretagne, I don't know if the G is silent, like Cologne. Bretagne. Some built ships and sailed across the waters until they landed in a small island. They called themselves Brythons and named their land Brython. A few traveled even further west, through high mountains and along rivers overflowing with fish, until they came to a place where sea and sky blended together, and here they settled down. They called themselves Welsh and named their land Cymru. Wait, is the C a S or a K? I think it might be a hard C sound. C is always hard as in cat. Cymru. Welsh, and name their land Cymru. All this happened almost 3,000 years ago, so the enchantment that turned the roes into fairies will soon be lifted, and the Tylwyth Teg will return to their true form of scaly-necked, thick-feathered, indestructible battle chargers. So anyone thinking of tormenting and taxing the Welsh will do well to think again. Okay, back to this other story. When I was a little boy, the King of Britain was enclosing the commons and selling them off to raise money to replace the warships lost in the wars with Bonaparte. So it was no surprise to the people of Myneth Bach when one day in 1819, an elegant gentleman from Lincolnshire named Augustus Brackenbury appeared on the mountain, dressed in silks, and announced that he had brought a portion of the mountain from the king and intended to build a castle, as many a man had done before him. The people stared. We were very good at staring, particularly us children and the sheep. Mr. Brackenbury considered us rude, but in truth, he was speaking in a language we did not understand. He spoke Cymraeg, or Welsh. Mr. Brackenbury built himself a house to live in while he designed his castle. The roof timbers were in place when he awoke one morning to find that his fine house had burned to the ground. I was watching the flames when Mr. Brackenbury grabbed me by the ear and asked if I was responsible for this. I stared, for he was speaking in a language I didn't understand. He dragged me to the magistrate and demanded a prosecution. The magistrate explained that the people of the Minith did not understand how he could have bought the land that was not owned by anyone. Indeed, they believed that the land owned them. So the magistrate fined him 2 shillings and 6 pence for wasting the law's time and let me go free as a bird. Mr. Brackenbury built another house, and the roof timbers were in place when it too burned to the ground. He was furious. He built a 3rd house, and this time he kept watch with a shotgun. As twilight fell, he watched a line of flares flickering down the mountain, each carried by a big, strong man. But it wasn't the size and strength of the men that was so frightening. It was that each and every one of them was dressed in a skirt, an apron, a blouse, a shawl, mop caps on their heads, and 1 or 2 of them even wore Welsh ladies' hats. Mr. Brackenbury raised his gun and pointed it at the ringleader, my father. Dafydd Ifin Igoff. Dafydd Ifin Igoff. There was a moment of silence, then birdsong and heartbeats stopped. Then Mr. Brackenbury lowered his gun, for how ridiculous would it be to shoot a man in a frock? We burned his house to the ground. He had to be dragged from the flames, and his coat buttons were as hot as roasted chestnuts. Mr. Brackenbury's face turned scarlet. He put up posters offering huge rewards in exchange for information about the ringleaders. But as they were written in a language the people of the mountain didn't understand, no one claimed the money. This was war. Mr. Brackenbury went away and returned with stone, timber, and watchmen, transported on ships from Scandinavia. He built a road from the sea at Llanrithsted to carry his belongings safely to Minith Bach, and by 1826 he had constructed his castle. It had a turret, crenellated walls, and a moat. The people stared. They were secretly impressed. They were craftsfolk, and they recognized fine workmanship. One day, Mr. Brackenbury was called away to Aberystwyth on business. On business. Aberystwyth on business. The preacher rode around on his pony, knocking on doors, and I blew my pibcorn, and they came from Langwerifon, from Lanellar, from Ledrod. Damn, Bean, how do you pronounce the double L? Why is that not in here? I'm looking it up online. This is driving me nut job. Okay, Welsh double L noise. Pronunciation.
Sugar, but you start to move your tongue forward as you're saying the sound. So you do something like this. There's a point where your tongue starts to go forward and you're no longer able to do the S sound, but it goes into it. So, ooh, there it is. So let's try it with a few words. Let's try Llanberis. Okay? Llanberis. Llanberis. Great.
Llanberis.
Now let's try.
That starts with 2 L's.
That you probably never have to say. Llyfais y llwy and Llanberis.
Llan.
Okay, so Llyfais.
Llan. Llyfais. Louis.
Llanberis.
Llanberis.
Llyfais y llwy yn Llanberis.
Man.
And gwellnofio mewn llyn
Hey.
na push. Put this one so you can get when S sneaks up on you in the middle or at the end of a word.
She's so cute. Gwell.
Gwell.
Gwell. Gwell.
Gwellnofio
Oh no.
mewn llyn na push.
Na push.
So push.
Push. Push.
Okay. You don't always have to pronounce it really strongly. It's not like, you know, if you say something like ti'n dod allan, it's quite soft. So you coming out, it's like ti'n dod allan.
Man.
So try it. Let me know how.
Welsh. I'm well, I'm gonna have to practice that though. I think I was just making kind of like a lisp noise. She was so good at that though, man. So once you know how, you just know how. Maybe by the end of this book I will. Okay. So all these words that I'm saying with this L, they don't sound like that, okay? They don't sound like that at all. They're kind of like a shiny. Oh gosh. Man. It's almost an S noise. Sengwerafon from Sanilar from Slorod. No. Slorod. So we're talking about Mr. Blackenbury being called away to business out in these places. There were 1,000 of them. They said, all of them dressed in skirts, aprons, blouses, shawls, mop caps on their heads, carrying sledgehammers and pickaxes. And in one night, the big boys of Trefenter knocked Mr. Brackenbury's castle to the ground. They threw his belongings in the moat and leveled off the ground, so you would scarcely have known that the castle had once stood there. When Mr. Brackenbury returned in the morning, he ordered the arrest of every man, woman, and sheep on the mountain. My father and I were captured and taken to the assizes in Abertifi. We were taken to the assizes, Assizes. Hey, let's look it up. Assizes. Sean, it sounds like Sean. Sean Brace. Thank you. That's helpful. Sean. That's way easier, dude. Thank you so much. I was really struggling to. That's so helpful, Saturnian. Thank you, man. I'll maybe struggle less now. Okay. Shoot, what was I? Asses. Asses. Assizes. Oh, Assizes. 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 A court which formerly sat at intervals in each county of England and Wales to administer the civil and criminal law. In 1972, the civil jurisdiction of Assize was transferred to the High Court, and the criminal jurisdiction to the Crown Court. Assize. I think that might be a different girl, actually. Assize. A court which formerly sat at intervals in each county of England. Intervals. in civil and criminal law. Okay, cool. Assize. Hey. Mother of pearls. Here it is. So my father and I were captured and taken to the assize of Abertifi. When the police stopped for a drink at Synod Inn, I escaped, but father was put on trial. However, the proceedings were held in a language he and 11 of the jurors didn't understand, so the magistrates set him free. The war lasted 10 years, from 1819 to 1829, and was known as Riffel y Seis Bach, the War of the Little Englishmen. No one died, although people were bruised and threatened. Carts were thrown into lakes, stones were thrown, and the magistrates were kept busy. But who won the war? Not Mr. Brackenbury, as he left the Minith and returned to London, where he dealt in salt and, some said, in slaves, nor the people who had no land to work and no way to earn a living. So they left in their hundreds. Between 1837 and 1839, 74 families left Minith Bach, a huge percentage of the population of around 1,500. They chartered sailing ships from Aberraron to Liverpool, families traveling together, old friends sipping a parting glass before waiting for days in the port until the schooner was ready to sail to the new world. The night before they left the Welsh shore, the migrants drank a couple of beers and smoked a few cigarettes in the quayside bars. Then they made a Seacork. Seacork? It's C-I-C-O-R-C. A dog with a cork body and a head, and matchsticks for legs, ears, neck, and a tail. It accompanied them on the voyage, but didn't necessarily bring good luck. Only if they made it to America alive did the Seacork become a lucky charm, and then they could pass it on to someone else who needed good fortune. My old friend, Will Richards, who lived at Seffin Koch, on the road to Shedrad, Shenadrad, he needed a Seacork. He shot a gamekeeper on Edward Vaughan's estate at Trosgod, a man called Joseph Butler. He didn't mean to kill him. He was after a few rabbits, and there was a scuffle, and the gun went off. We all took rabbits from old Vaughan. He had more than he needed, and he'd evicted people from their cottages, treated us like filth. We'd been fighting men like him for generations, for we were radicals in our souls. It was election night, 1868, and Vaughan was in Aberystwyth at the counting of the votes. He was the sitting Tory MP and assumed it was his right to win. But for the first time, a few working men had the vote, and Vaughan lost his seat. The streets were packed with revelers and armed constables to watch them, so Will thought no one would be guarding the estate. When Vaughan returned home that evening and found his gamekeeper dead, he ordered the police to search barns and cowsheds, but there was no sign of Will. With the help of Dafydd Thomas Joseph, clockmaker from Trefenter, and John Jones, grocer of Aberystwyth, Will had been smuggled out of Ceredigion over the hills to avoid the roadblocks. He was disguised as a woman, though he was tall and gangly, with a stubbly stick-out chin, and walked with a limp after bruising his testicle during the fight on the estate. He reached Liverpool and took a ship bound for America, where he was hidden by the settlers who had left Minith Bach after the war with Mr. Brackenbury. He changed his name to David D. Evans, bought a farm, married his sweetheart Elizabeth Morgan from Bont, gave up the drink, calmed his temper, and settled in Oak Hill, Ohio, where he stayed for the remainder of his days. He's buried in the chapel graveyard out of town, while Butler, the gamekeeper, rests in Shananafon in a grave on the other side of the church from where Old Man Vaughn is sleeping in his vault they call Little England. I have been to Oak Hill. Amish Mennonite people live there and park their traps in the center of town, where the old Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad track runs down the main street, although the trains stopped years ago. The old chapel is now a Welsh museum with a cut-out red dragon standing outside. There is no mention of Will Sefton Koch, for although he was a folk hero in Ceredigion, he was a black sheep in Oak Hill. The Welsh and Amish weren't the first settlers in Ohio, of course. The Cherokee were already there. No wonder I'm Welsh and Cherokee. And Scottish and Irish. I have ancestors right from here in Ohio where I am. Yeah, they're not alive anymore. Just in case. So the Welsh and Amish weren't the first settlers in Ohio, of course. The Cherokee were already there, and they told stories of their own migration. Their ancestors turned toward the sun and walked until they came upon people who were building mounds. So they settled and built even greater mounds. All was well until one of their leaders was found dead, and she was drained of blood. They realized the mound builders were cannibals and sacrificed humans. So there was a great war, and the few remaining mound people married to the Cherokee. There is a mound city in Chillicothe, a burial site constructed almost 2,000 years ago, bearing silent witness to the lost inhabitants of ancient Appalachia. They were known as the Hopewell people, not that they would have called themselves by that name. Mordecai Hopewell was the man who believed he owned the land when the mounds were excavated in 1891. I visited those mounds. Plus, I dated a handsome boy from Chillicothe for a while. I don't know if you could really call it dating. All right, to the other story. And there we are. I, Sicey Iffin, sexton of Shanongwinrifon, have told you these tales, leaning on my shovel in the old churchyard, surrounded by those who did not leave for Ohio and Appalachia. Stone walls and barbed white wire fences have sliced up Minnith Bach like a cake. And look, they have planted wind turbines in the ruins of the peat cutters' cottages. But you see, I believe the land itself won the war with Mr. Brockenbury. For walls and fences and wind turbines will, in time, tumble to the ground. And now it is my bedtime. I must drink a little whiskey from my flask for medicinal purposes, you understand, and return to my bed in the grave I dug for myself next to my father over 100 years ago, where I have room to wiggle my toes. Pob? What's the H-W-Y-L? Howl? Hool? E. I don't know how to say it. Hey, Annie D. Pob Hool. I apologize. And then here's a little picture. That's the end of the story. Awesome. So that was chapter 3. And I do believe I'm going to call it right there. And we'll come in with chapter 4 next time, which is Lone Man Coyote. Yeah, because I still got some full moon stuff to do. And I think the rain stopped. I wonder how much I ought to collect. I'm going to go check. I keep checking like every 2 minutes. I'm like, okay, there's a couple more drops. But it's been an hour. I wonder how much is in there now. So I love yous. I wish you happy full moons. Let's take in that energy. And if you feel overwhelmed by emotions or thoughts in this full big moon energy, I recommend you think about your breath and pray for guidance and assistance, and it will come. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow. Mwah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.